critical race theory is the right's new obsession, their new bugaboo. It's the ants in their pants. And along with cancel culture, it's the biggest problem facing America. But just one problem. What WTF is critical race theory? According to this first of all, critical race theory started as a term of critical or a branch of critical analysis in legal studies, and it specifically relates to how does law, even though in post-segregation, post-Civil Rights Act, post-Voting Rights Act, even though the law doesn't directly discriminate on terms of race, how is racism enforced through the legal system, without being explicitly, having laws based on race, right? And there's a lot of ways that this happens, right? It could happen in the tax code. It could happen in, sentencing or three strikes, and so many different methods and ways of analyzing that. That's what critical race theory is about. It's a method of analysis. All right. Here, and it has kind of expanded out and morphed as academic disciplines will. This is in Ed Week. Critical race theory is an academic concept that is more than 40 years old. The core idea is that racism is a social construct and that it is not merely the product of individual bias or prejudice, but also something embedded in legal systems and policies. The basic tenets of critical race theory, or CRT, emerged out of a framework for legal analysis in the late 1970s and early 1980s, created by legal scholars Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, and Richard Delgado, among others. A good example is when, in the 1930s, government officials literally drew lines around areas deemed poor financial risks, often explicitly due to racial composition of inhabitants. Banks subsequently refused to offer mortgages to black people in those areas. So today, those same patterns of discrimination live on through financially race-blind policies, facially race-blind policies, like single-family zoning that prevents the building of affordable housing in advantaged majority white neighborhoods, and thus stymies racial desegregation efforts. Yes, single-family zoning. I mean, I have a video about from last week of the Santa Maria, my city council, getting slapped by the feds with a possible fine because of how exactly a code about single-family residences, having to do with H-2A farm worker housing. So very, not even like subtly race involved, very, very explicitly. CRT also has ties to other intellectual currents, including the work of sociologists and literary theorists who study links between political power, social organization, and language. And its ideas have since informed other fields like the humanities, social sciences, and teacher education. This academic understanding of critical race theory differs from representation in recent popular books, and especially from its portrayal by critics, often, though not exclusively, conservative Republicans. Critics charge that the theory leads to negative dynamics, such as a focus on group identity over universal shared traits, divides people into oppressed and oppressor groups, and urges intolerance. Thus, there is a good deal of confusion over what CRT means, as well as its relationship to other terms like anti-racism and social justice, with which it's often conflated. To an extent, the term critical race theory is now cited as the basis of all diversity and inclusion efforts, regardless of how much it's actually informed those programs. Let's read that again. To an extent, the term critical race theory is now cited as the basis of all diversity and inclusion efforts, regardless of how much it's actually informed those programs. So there you go. So they bring, this is a good real world example. One conservative organization, the Heritage Foundation, recently attributed a whole host of issues to CRT, including the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests, LGBTQ clubs in schools, diversity training in federal agencies and organizations, California's recent ethnic studies model curriculum, the free speech debate on college campuses, and alternatives to exclusionary discipline, such as Promise program in Broward County, Florida, that some parents blame for the Parkland school shootings. Quote, when followed to its logical conclusion, CRT is destructive and rejects the fundamental ideas on which our constitutional republic is based, the organization claimed. So, now that we understand what critical race theory actually is, and I credit Education Week, or Ed Week, Education Week for really detailing that in a specific way, but also illustrating how the right conflates anything having to do with addressing, recognizing, acknowledging racism and race in the United States, as it's all critical race theory to them. Because multiple states, Florida being the most recent and kind of publicly discussed one, have passed legislation to ban critical race theories from schools. This is part of what Donald Trump's 1776 commission was about. Not only are they trying to ban critical race theory from schools, which they're just equating with any ethnic studies, any history that acknowledges slavery, racism, the genocide of Native Americans, apartheid, etc., Jim Crow, right? That is now all under the umbrella of critical race theory, to the point that they're banning books. Somebody in chat mentioned earlier Howard Zinn books like The People's History of the United States being banned. I believe I have that over my shoulder here somewhere. But also the 1619 Project, the recent New York Times effort to kind of frame American history through the lens of slavery and racism, right? But, this, guys, one of the closest to you, if you pay attention to that type of thing, representative bodies at the ground level, and one of the most easiest to run for and also, access, is a school board. All across the country, there are school boards, and they have been under attack for, here in California, you see it a lot because the state is, and different people in different districts will push for ethnic studies. But you have all these MAGA types running in, screaming their heads off about critical race theory. So the critical race theory monster hunt is beginning to wreak havoc on local school boards. This is an Esquire. Very few of the people who toss the phrase around know what it actually is, but its political utility doesn't depend on something as silly as that. This is Ron DeSantis, Florida governor, of course. They're banning critical race theory from schools. So they're literally banning books. We're at the point where the right in America is banning books. They're banning academic disciplines from schools, which really, I'm sorry, but in grade schools, junior high, high school, nobody is doing critical race theory. But again, it's just being used as this catch-all. It's all a wash now. Anything that addresses racism or even acknowledges it or history is critical race theory. Let's see. Do they realize how crazy it really is out there these days? Do they realize how the tendrils of crazy now instantly connect with what they're doing or not doing in Washington with the crazy at the local level? From the Associated Press. Opponents of the Washoe County's curriculum proposal camped on the eastern side of the entrance to a packed local school board meeting on Tuesday, wearing MAGA hats and carrying signs that read "No CRT. CRT teaches racism, and the school board works for the people." To combat concerns about ideological indoctrination, the Nevada Family Alliance has proposed outfitting teachers with body cameras to ensure that they aren't indoctrinating students in classrooms. Guys, they want to surveil the teachers. We can't trust the teachers. Quote, "You guys have a serious problem with activist teachers pushing politics in the classroom, and there's no place for it, especially for our fifth graders," Karen England, the group's executive director, told trustees Tuesday. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, following a national conservative playbook, said he wanted to prevent instructors from teaching kids to hate their country. Quote, the governor, speaking via a video connection, told the State Board of Education that he does not want to stop children from learning about slavery or the civil rights movement, only to make sure they don't hear, quote, narratives that are not grounded in facts. He wants to prevent, he has said, students from learning a false history where they, quote, look back and denigrate the founding fathers, denigrate the American Revolution. In his short address, he offered no instances where Florida teachers had offered accurate history lessons, but cited problems in schools in Arizona and New York. Interesting. It's Let's see. Here's another one from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The Cobb County School Board's resolution, which is approved during its work session, was introduced by Board Chairman Randy Scamahorn, who said he brought up the topic because educators allegedly said on social media they were using part of the theory in their classroom discussions. He said critical race theory is a Marxist concept that pits one group of people against the other. It's revisionist history, and history should be thorough, Scamahorn said. Let's see. I mean, a lot of interesting shit here. Board member Michael Loth cast the only dissenting vote in overturning the April 12th decision. He said he didn't like how critical race theory involves Marxism, how Marxism has failed in countries such as Venezuela. Jeez. So this is all, and this is the thing, this is all part of anti-communist, red-baiting psychopathy that exists on the right. This is what was done during the civil rights movement. The entire civil rights movement was equated with communism. This is part of, obviously you had the Black Panthers that were avowed open communists, but a lot of those leaders got assassinated. They were actually, openly and clearly assassinated by the United States government in some cases, and then very obscurely assassinated in other cases, like Martin Luther King. But it was very clear that they were, the right was labeling Martin Luther King a communist. They were making it all, the whole civil rights thing was communism. Here is, a picture from that time. Communists infiltrated our churches. Now it integrates our schools, right? So, very clear that this is just part of the old right-wing playbook. And there are a lot of these different online personalities who have made a career out of critical race theory. When it's so easy to do a right-wing grift, to just focus on any right-wing grievance and make a career out of that. Jordan Peterson did it with, trans people, and then, I won't be told, I cannot be told to give pronouns. I will not be compelled. I will not be compelled to say the pronouns of trans students, right? He was able to springboard that into a career as a self-help guru, right? Clean your room, bucko. And you have all these different, right-wing characters who do this type of thing. One of them was this guy, James Lindsay, and he also aligned himself with, what is her name? This really weird person. What's her, oh, geez, I can't remember her name. Borysenko. They did, and this is an old tactic that the right has done before, where they sent they did a made up article. They did a ruse article for a gender studies journal, and then trolled them basically. And guess what? It was a paid journal, so they paid to get it in, right? And then had it published, and they went, look how stupid gender studies is, or race studies or whatever. They did gender studies. But so they realized there was money in critical race theory because the right is weaponizing it as this catch-all term for anti-racism. And anti-racism having a bit of a moment, if you didn't notice, in the United States. And let's see here. And so James Lindsay has been this open, anti-critical race theory guy, but it wasn't only until just the other day, let's see, I guess this was from a while ago. This is from last year. Wokeness turns people sociopathic. This is because it utterly fixates by definition on one type of suffering, hegemonic oppression. It hopefully won't grow into something that bears fruit, but that's the seed of a genocide. So what is he, and I believe he ended up retweeting this recently. Let's see, quote tweets. I can find his own quote tweet probably. Here it is. In light of, this is the one from just the other day. In light of on having whiteness, which characterizes white people as parasites with no permanent cure, I'm going to re-up this statement I made before about wokeness containing the seed of genocide. So he's basically given a little wink and a nod to the white supremacist and the white replacement theory, and the white genocide theory, that people of color simply being allowed to exist and, kind of speaking up and being, hey, can we have a little less of the white supremacy in our society? That's tantamount to genocide to white people. Now, as a white guy myself, I feel, kind of have to mention, I don't feel replaced. I don't feel attacked by people of color existing, like just living their lives. Especially, we were just watching earlier video footage of a Guatemalan man, a forensic anthropologist, digging up the body of his wife and children who were murdered by right-wing kill squads in the hillsides of Guatemala, which was helped and facilitated and funded by our CIA because the global South was to be dominated and resources extracted from it. And our society, which very much based in white supremacy, it was not part of our plan to have people of color and indigenous countries with massive indigenous populations in the global South have autonomy and self-determination. It was not part of our plan, right? So, the having a historical analysis, does this make me woke because I know history and I don't feel threatened by people of color existing in my proximity or being, having children and living their lives? No, I think it just makes me a compassionate human being. If you want to call that woke, be my guest. But other people have taken notice to James Lindsay's James Lindsay sounds the alarm about white genocide. This is Rebel Radio. I'm glad to see he only has 47 followers, but you go to his website. It's an openly neo-Confederate, neo-Nazi website, and they're celebrating James Lindsay and his stuff. Even Claire Lehman of Quillette. Quillette is the kind of intellectual dark web, center-right. They were like, we kind of need to think about, they've done all kinds of weird, IQ and race, creepy stuff. But even Claire Lehman is saying Jim Lindsay is now peddling white genocide theory, implying that a genocide against whites in the U.S. is imminent, has the potential to inspire racist violence. Such comments are extreme, reckless, and irresponsible. They should be denounced. Opposition to wokeness and critical race theory is one thing. Suggesting that the majority racial group in the U.S. is on the verge of being slaughtered is another. If a sharp line is not drawn between the two, they will become conflated by progressives to discredit anti-CRT efforts. So she's worried about the optics. Like, hey, we're doing a really good job with the, equating all everything having to do with anti-racism and all this stuff with critical race theory. Come on, man, you're messing it up for all of us. And possible maniacs, extremists, people who have become insane via overexposure to the internet may also feel inspired, emboldened, and validated to commit terrorist violence. James Lindsay needs to stop now. Boy, when the Quillette lady is going after you, lots of Lindsay supporters are arguing that I misrepresented him. I just don't see that's the case. Let's see. So these are just different interactions, but it's interesting because this guy is Sam Hoadley Brill. He's a PhD student, philosophy student, and he has been kind of he has been attempting to argue against a lot of these anti-critical race theory people. Here's another guy, Chris. He's sharing a tweet from this guy, Chris Rufo. This is when they tell you exactly what they're doing. You should listen. And this is the funny thing. People, these skullduggery people. Like I used the term rat fucking earlier. I don't know if this is really rat fucking. This is just propagandizing, but he's laying it out clearly. We have successfully frozen their brand, critical race theory, into the public conversation and are steadily driving up negative perceptions. We will eventually turn it toxic as we put all of the various cultural insanities under that brand category. The goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and immediately think critical race theory. We have decodified the term and will recodify it to annex the entire range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans. I would say he's talking about white Americans, white right-wing Americans. So, I mean, that's just them clearly explaining what they mean, what they're doing. That's right there. That's how the sausage is made, folks. That's what all this anti-critical race theory stuff is. It's about just blanketing and equating, any discussion of racism in the United States with this kind of obscure legal theory, critical analysis of of law that goes back 40 years, just equating all of it under this umbrella term. It used to be PC culture. It used to be the PC police, political correctness. It was just woke for a while. They just called it the woke thing. My favorite was when Donald Trump would be like, when you see what's happening in this country with woke, what they're doing with woke. He couldn't even add any qualifiers or indefinite pronouns before it. Couldn't say the woke thing, just woke. When you see what's going on with woke. There was a big YouTube debate. There was a big YouTube debate about this topic, critical race theory. And that guy, Sam Hoadley Bell, was a part of it. And let's see, I'm trying to find, there's a point where he defined it. So this is interesting. So keep in mind, like, the anti-critical race theory people are super anti-identity politics. Like, they claim to hate identity politics. And in this panel, the two guys on the top middle and top right are arguing, like, they're not arguing pro-critical race theory. They even say, oh, yeah, we have some criticism of it. They're saying, what you guys are talking about is not critical race theory. You're doing this other thing here. And at this point, what's her name? Borysenko or whatever her name is, has left. She rage quit the debate, and this guy's a moderator. And then we have two of these folks here are black anti-critical race theory. What this lady Gothix has a YouTube channel. I think this guy does too. He's like a philosophy student too. But it's really interesting because Sam Hoadley Bell kind of sums up their whole discussion. I watched way too much of this shit. But you're going to get a taste of what the other folks are like in a second. But let's just listen to him define critical race theory and kind of what they're doing with it.
I mean, critical race theory is not necessarily supposed to, like, benefit one race any more than another. Critical race theory is good for anyone to learn. But I mean, it still seems clear to me that our opponents are not clear on what critical race theory is, or if they are, then they're just electing to do that Rufo and Lindsay style conflation where they're continuing to talk about it as the sorts of, stupid D'Angelo-esque things that they've seen on social media, in the news media, etc. I mean, I defined critical race theory as well as one can define it, because it does sort of elude, a necessary and sufficient conditions style analysis, right? Not everything can be pinned down in such a way. I'm sure Christian would recognize that. Some things we can only give at best an approximation, a cluster concept. And that's what I did. I said, look, critical race theory is a movement of scholars. It's an academic movement. They're interested in understanding how race and racism continue to play such an important role in American life after all of this landmark civil rights legislation that was supposed to bring us to a state of racial equality. And then, even after that, I said, here are some things that a lot of critical race theorists believe. I gave examples. And for some reason, Christian thinks I just said it was a movement. Anyways, I mean, I'd love to continue the discussion more, but it seems like when we were giving the examples that were asked for, they were just sort of either brushed under the rug or just taken as not representative or unsatisfying. And I mean, at that point, I don't know what else to do.
Yeah, and having watched this debate, like, they really just kept, like, he would explain what critical race theory was or explain why what they were talking about wasn't critical race theory. And then they would just continue saying, Oh no, but that's no, that's not critical race theory. What clip is this?
Do you identify as black?
No.
Oh, so this is interesting. This is so this is a good example of like how the anti-CRT people will claim to be against identity politics, but then use it for their own devices when they can. This is Gothix. It was her YouTube channel. If you want to go check out this whole debate, it is interesting to hear philosophy. These two guys are PhDs in philosophy, talk about these different theories, and then you have just kind of YouTubers who are like, I mean, this guy is pretty thoughtful. He definitely is a philosophy student, but he's coming at it with all of this baggage about what he thinks CRT is. But anyway, let's listen to what this identity politics, this is how identity politics works on the right, guys. They claim to hate it, but this is what they'll do with it. Watch this.
Do you identify as black?
No.
You don't identify. Do you identify as a woman?
No. I'm a human.
So you don't identify with any descriptors beyond human?
No. I'm curious why I have...
So it clipped because it's now later in the debate. And I've heard this before. In some sense, I've said this before, that, hey, I identify as a human being, and so I stand in solidarity with everybody. But we all have to admit that race exists as a construct. It's not real. It's not biologically real. It's not a fact. But we live in a society where the social construct of race exists in the head of millions of people. But so yeah, she just said, I don't identify as black or a woman, and then let's listen to this.
Two white men suggesting to a black woman that to me that seems a little bit racist. It seems a little bit stereotypical.
Do you
Let's hear it
identify as
again
black?
from the beginning.
No.
You don't identify. Do you identify as a woman?
No. I'm a human.
So you don't identify with any descriptors beyond human?
No. I'm curious why I have two white men suggesting to a black woman that to me that seems a little bit racist. It seems a little bit stereotypical.
And so and she wasn't the only one. This character here, Karlyn Borysenko. So look at this. She's very weird. Very, very weird. She did a video for PragerU, the right-wing propaganda mill, where she was like, I went to a Trump event and nobody told me to leave, and they didn't call me names, and I didn't hear racist things in my vicinity. So everything else about them is a lie. And she spent a lot of the stream knitting. Like, I'm going to knit, while I do this. I'm just going to knit. And so her little Twitter here, Karlyn Borysenko, most dangerous knitter alive. So she's trying to say to Sam Hoadley Bell, you make zero efforts to have good faith conversations or understand the perspective of another person and why they want and value different things than you. You make that impossible. You're too interested in scoring points. And I can analyze why that is, but I won't. Oh, God, be very afraid, Sam Hoadley Bell. Kenzo's here. Hey, Kenzo. He said she sucks. And yes, she does. And so she said that you zero efforts to have good faith conversations. So Sam shared this, and this is a really fascinating exchange because she pulls into the Jordan Peterson toolkit, talking about equality of outcome is equality of opportunity is really equality of outcome. It's Marx. The communists are under your bed. Clean your room because there might be communists under your bed hiding there.
Okay, I have a really simple question. Do you believe in equality of outcomes or equality of opportunity?
Before we go to that, that's a good question, but I want to hear the answer to Sam's question, which was what evidence the Gothics has, or Christian, or any of you.
That's the moderator. He did not really do a very good job of preventing things like this from happening.
You want to answer it?
This is but this is the evidence. This is the evidence right here.
origin.
No, this is the evidence. Okay. Do you believe in equality of outcome or equality of opportunity?
So, okay.
Could you define what you mean by each?
Equality of outcome is that we all have equal outcomes. Equality of opportunity is that we all have equal access to opportunity.
But how? Okay, but outcomes in what sense? Like, do we all have at least the same baseline outcome? Like everyone gets to eat every day, or do we have all the exact same?
No. We're not getting fancy about this, Sam. The entire premise of Ibermex
you can't ask questions about a vague. You can't ask questions about a vague question. Right? You can't ask for clarification. No.
Your question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you interrupting a woman?
Oh, look at that. She just relied on her own
really
little
simple question.
identity politics. Are you going to interrupt a woman, huh?
Baseline outcome, like everyone gets to eat every day, or do we have all the exact
No. We're not getting fancy about this, Sam. The entire premise of Ibrahim
asking you to clarify your question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you interrupting a woman? The entire premise of Ibrahim X Kendi.
So just laughing at her.
Women outrank Jews on the oppression hierarchy, Aaron. The entire
getting a little weird. Aaron Rabinowitz is Jewish.
Premise of Sam, you talked for like half an hour. Don't you do this? The entire premise.
So here she is flipping him off, and she just said that he doesn't have good faith conversations. So
of Ibrahim X Kendi is equality of outcomes. It is in reducing disparities of outcomes based on broad racial categories. So, do you believe in equality of outcomes, or do you believe in equality of opportunity?
So this is clearly she's equating anything woke or anti-racist or whatever with critical race theory, and this is exactly the point that Sam and Aaron made the whole time. This is exactly the point that's been made again and again and again, is they are using critical race theory to create this wash between anything and everything that addresses racism is now critical race theory, even though it's not. And it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter because they just keep repeating it enough. So that's what it is now. And they just say, well, you're not talking about what critical race theory is because this is what we say it is.
You just said reducing disparity.
No. This is an either or. Yes, it is.
You can't ask me a question.
Here's the thing. I can answer
vague.
this. It's not at all vague. Do you believe
it is absolutely vague?
It is not. See, I can answer this. Here's how
it's
this.
It's a very complicated ethical question.
No. It is not a complicated.
Answer.
This is the
difference.
Really
is.
Oh my goodness. And this is. I mean, this is what it's like. I mean, those two guys are PhDs in philosophy. Not that I'm a credentialist. You know what I mean? But hold on, what's this?
You don't have to.
Okay, so not that I like it matters. PhDs matter, more than anything. But like, they are making a very good faith effort to engage with these people and get them to understand the philosophical underpinnings and the what type of analysis critical race theory is, and they're getting responded to with stuff like this.
No.
Oh, well, we saw that already. This one was interesting. This is where he shares. He goes, okay, this is where I might have even lost my temper. Let's see that. Really
better, since those things seem to be more immediately relatable to those circumstances. It's probably better to say, okay, instead of looking at the racial disparity and assuming there's some kind of injustice, look at the particular policing practices for that area, for that community, and try to see why they're happening. Because more oftentimes than not, there is a reason behind it. The reason may be unjust. Chuck Rangel and the CBO.
So that's a very common thing, and that's what is even in the legislation that DeSantis and other Republican legislatures have put forward, is that they want to reduce everything down to the individual, right? This is part of the ideology of neoliberalism. Margaret Thatcher said, there is no society, just individuals, right? And they want to reduce everything down. There is no systemic racism. There may be racist police who do racist things individually, but that can't be part of a system. That can't be part of, broader trends or any of that. No, it's all just individuals acting on their individual, as if society doesn't push people in certain directions or enforce certain hierarchies.
We're not disagreeing. Not disagreeing with that.
Then
let me make a point. Let me make a point.
Okay.
Let me make a
little
point.
Heated. Okay, go on.
Just let me make a fucking point, dude.
Go on.
The point is this, okay? We are looking at, right? And like you said, there's a causal story you can tell about why the policing practices are different. I'm not disputing that. None of us are claiming that the only causal story is systemic racism. That's not what the claim is. The claim is, when you have this, no matter what the causal story is, you have two individuals who, for the relevant purposes, are behaving the same way. in terms of, or two populations who are behaving the same way, white kids, black kids, possessing drugs at the same rate, right? And yet, so they're committing crimes, the relevant crimes, at the same rate. And yet, one group is far more likely to get put into jail.
Interesting. So we don't need to spend the whole rest of the night watching clips from that. But there's just a lot of interesting commentary on this. This one guy retweeted one of these clips and said, there are people who think things are remarkably simple and straightforward, and people who think most things, but especially social problems, are just a tad complicated. Nothing is more illustrative of our current political moment. That's interesting. Here's Chad Loder, an anti-fascist journalist who I follow some of his stuff, and he makes this point: critical race theory, Antifa, 5G, adrenochrome, bathroom gender invaders, migrant caravans, MS-13, Sharia law, Soros, Pizzagate, Acorn. Fascism always requires a nefarious plot against the people, blamed on designated outgroups who will be demonized and attacked. And when you hear the more unabashedly right-wing and far-right talking heads talk about critical race theory, they always link it to Marxism, and they will say cultural Marxism. And this very much is connected to the idea of cultural Bolshevism, which is what the Nazis termed about how they blame the Jews for problems in Germany. Here it is. Here's a definition. Cultural Bolshevism, sometimes referred to specifically as art Bolshevism or music Bolshevism, was a term widely used by Nazi German-sponsored critics to denounce modernist movements in the culture, particularly in seeking to discredit more nihilistic forms of expression. This first became an issue during the 1920s in Weimar Germany, when German artists such as Max Ernst and Max Beckmann were denounced by Adolf Hitler, the Nazi Party, and other German nationalists as cultural Bolsheviks. Nazi claims about attacks on conceptions of family, identity, music, art, and intellectual life were generally referred to as cultural Bolshevism, the Bolsheviks being the Marxist revolutionary movement in Russia. So you will hear right-wingers with no sense of irony or any of that openly say, that this is all cultural Marxism. So if you don't think if you don't think that's a problem, if you don't think fascism is a real threat right now in the United States, guys, you got to wake up. I kind of sounded the trumpet on this early, when Trump was attacking journalists. It's literally like, checking box number 1 on the fascism card, right? And it didn't make me many friends. It didn't help me professionally all that much to be talking about it that early on. But here's one little interesting. So critical race theory has been trending on Twitter because of all these laws and this debate, people discussing it. And I'm not I don't watch a lot of Vosh, but this was a funny exchange. Vosh said, I have talked with many conservatives who oppose critical race theory and exactly 0 who could actually define it. And our old buddy Tim Pool said, hey, let's have you back on the show and we can discuss it. Last time was pretty fun. And it's the Serfs posted this, which is a video from their last exchange, which exactly what Vosh said happened.
Critical race theory is neo-segregationist. It's overtly.
Can you describe to me what critical race theory is?
So, in layman's terms, I don't have the academic definition up. Pulled up for you, but specifically privilege plus power, whiteness, minorities, traits of whiteness would be specifically like hard work, scheduling.
I want the Joe Biden drop. You know the thing.
I'll tell you this: the tenets of critical race theory. Though I've definitely done segments on the overt academic definition.
What is it, Tim?
But when they put out a list that says whiteness, they say things like down with white.
Who's they?
Traits of whiteness include schedules, hard work, planning for the future, 2.5 kids, and all of those things.
You're just listing the one Smithsonian Museum pamphlet that was passed out and largely criticized. Critical race theories.
Criticized by who? It was in the Smithsonian for decades.
That specific pamphlet, no, it was not. This pamphlet you're referring to right now, I know because I covered on my stream and made fun of it as well. No, it was made specifically, probably some new int student or somebody who was in their 20s made it. It got taken away almost immediately afterwards following bad reception. To pretend that this is indicative of an entire academic theory is very silly. I learned critical race theory in sociology. That was my major. It's very, very simple. Critical race theory is just the racialized element of critical theory. That is to say, you analyze racial relations based on distinctive power relationships between different groups.
Wah, wah, wah. Tim Pool. Not doing too great. I like you, Tim. You're a nice guy, but you're not the sharpest tool in the shed. Sleepy Tim. Don't even know what critical race theory is. Can't even give a good definition. Wow.